Hello and welcome to 360 Degrees. Today we're looking at the EU Citizens' Initiative, brought in under the Lisbon Treaty with the aim of empowering ordinary voters, you and me in other words, to make legislative policy proposals that must be at least considered. That doesn't mean they'll be adopted, of course. Citizens can propose, not dispose. And it cannot just be you and your immediate circle of friends. It needs 1 million signatures within a 12-month period of the proposal being accepted as being within the EU's competence. And they have to come from a number of countries in accordance with a complicated formula that insists that in at least 7 of those countries, the total number of signatures must reach the figure of 750 times the number of that country's MEPs. So you'll need a lot of support and possibly a slide rule. Let me introduce my guests. They are George Schoplin, a Hungarian member of the EPP group, who in a distinguished career has worked for the BBC and is still Jean Monnet Professor at the University of London, and Marco Contiero, Policy Director on Genetic Engineering and Sustainable Agriculture at Greenpeace's European unit in Brussels. Greenpeace, in fact, is probably the first organisation to have actually launched an ECI, even though they're not generally open for business, as it were, until the 1st of April this year. But before we start discussing the whole issue, let's take a look at this report.
Hello, I'm Simon from Belgium, and I would like to know how I can have the EU to do what I want.
The simple answer is through the Citizens' Initiative. It's part of the Lisbon Treaty, and it means people can organise online or paper petitions to propose new EU legislation.
Well, if they have a real point that they want to put on our table with a view to getting law or European legislation in the end, they need to get together with a few of their friends. Precisely, they need to find 6 other friends from 6 different European countries, and then they can start an initiative.
So, the 7 people from 7 different EU countries must first register their proposal with the European Commission, which decides if it's admissible. If it is, organisers have 12 months in which to collect 1 million signatures. The minimum total of signatures needed for each country is 750 times its number of MEPs. The Commission then has 3 months in which to decide whether or not to act, and some feel it's still not enough.
It's a step forward because citizens can now put things on the agenda, but it's a very little step forward, because what we need is real citizen participation. In the end, we need also referenda, I would say, on the European level. So it's a step forward, but we need further steps.
Assuming you get your idea accepted, your 1 million signatures will get you and your collaborators a top-level meeting at the Commission. Your proposal will also be discussed at length at a meeting that will be open to the public, so you may not get exactly what you were hoping for, but your ideas will be debated and may still lead to changes in EU law.
At the end of the process, not only do those original 7 friends get to sit down with a key commissioner, we hope, or somebody very senior in the Commission to discuss their idea, they will also have a hearing probably in the Parliament, whether the idea can be discussed sort of much more publicly and widely.
Different countries demand differing levels of detail about those who sign the petition, but the Citizens' Initiative is thought to have played a part in persuading Irish voters to accept the Lisbon Treaty, and they may be among the first to use it.
In Ireland at the moment now there's big discussion about, for instance, the corporation tax, and if that were to be seen to be threatened in Europe, I could see a Citizens' Initiative arising out of that, or perhaps also the interest rate that we have to pay in the bailout.
The lack of guarantees of a positive outcome, though, may prove a handicap. A successful collection of signatures for a citizens' initiative in California, for instance, must lead to a referendum. The downside is that large corporations are among the few capable of organising or affording such an exercise.
They will use the citizens' initiative to stop laws that they don't like. They will have a lobby consultancy set up a front group of pretending to be citizens, and then pumping in a lot of money into getting the signatures collected and winning the referendum campaign. So this is really a farce, in fact.
It's hoped that won't happen in Europe. The public have long been able to petition the European Parliament over the application of existing laws. Now the facility to propose legislation should be in place by 2012. Most MEPs hope it's just the first step and that many more will follow. George Schoplin, just the first step, but is it enough? Is it not just rather window dressing and an attempt to bring the citizens closer to Brussels?
Well, that is not in itself window dressing. I think any attempt to bring the citizens closer to Brussels is a step in the right direction. Not quite the first step. After all, Parliament is now directly elected and has been for several decades, so I think we can regard that as the first step. It's not enough, and I think most people would agree with you. It's terribly difficult, actually, for 751 members of the European Parliament to get their way through to 500 million European citizens. So you can see there's a real communication problem, a kind of real representation problem. From this perspective, I think that's right. The idea that you can have initiatives from below which can trigger legislation, I think is a very positive step, and I can say exactly why. It provides the citizens with a political instrument for dealing with the EU. This is the real problem. This is the so-called Irish disconnect, you'll know this term, that actually there's been no way for the citizens to engage with the European Union politically. So it's very technical, depoliticised, very boring.
Marco Contiero, you obviously feel, Greenpeace feels that it is a useful initiative. I mean, Greenpeace actually launched a citizens' initiative even before it's become legally acceptable for everyone to do that.
Yes, in 2010, since the EU treaty, which entered into force in December 2009, was enshrining this right for citizens to petition the Commission to act, we decided to launch a petition after the Commission authorized the GM potato, quite renowned, controversial as well, from BSF. We have to say that in terms of gathering petitions, gathering these signatures, we've witnessed a massive and rapid response from European citizens, which clearly gives to, on the one hand, it's a clear interest of citizens for this new democratic instrument, and on the other hand, it's clearly also showing the concerns that European citizens have with regard to genetic engineering and GM food. So it also depends on the issue that you're talking about. But from what we witnessed, it's clearly a tool that is, it's interesting for people.
Presumably, though, it's going to take an organisation the size of Greenpeace, as multinational as Greenpeace, to actually organise this. I mean, 7 signatures before it can even be presented to the Commission for them to decide if it's acceptable or not. 1 million signatures on a very complicated system across the whole of the EU. Only very large NGOs, very large pressure groups are going to be able to organise anything, aren't they?
It is. For us, it was difficult, even for us, which, I mean, we have offices in several EU countries. We gathered signatures for all 27 member states, even those where we don't have offices, and we reached the very difficult thresholds, which now the regulation has to be met in 7 countries. We reached it in 12 countries. Why? Because we believe the subject matter of the petition was something very clear in people's minds, something which is not addressed properly by EU institutions. So there was a gap between what EU citizens wanted and what European institutions were actually acting upon. We think that where this gap exists, it will be difficult, but also other organizations, not only bigger NGOs, will be capable of doing this.
There is the fear, though, isn't there, George Shopland, that this could become a sort of cranks charter. I mean, when I was working in radio, I remember one of my colleagues saying the only letters he ever got were from the halt, the lame and the mad, as he put it. That doesn't mean that all his listeners were like that, but the ones who participate tended to be slightly cranky. There is a risk that those who get involved in this sort of thing are also going to be hold odd views, shall we say.
Look, that risk is going to be there. I agree with that, but I'm not sure that anybody who is politically active is by definition a crank. Otherwise, you'd be saying all 751 MEPs are cranks, indeed the members of every national parliament is a crank. No, I mean, I think we can dismiss that. I think that it's interesting that there is an issue like genetically modified food on which you can mobilise a lot of support. I do know of another initiative which is to do with linguistic minorities, and they are also working. I don't know how far they've got on putting together the 7 countries, the 1 million signatures. It won't be ready, of course, for the 1st of April, but should be ready towards the end of the year. There's a very interesting question, for example, that EU material is not available in Frisian. There are about 600,000 speakers of Frisian in the Netherlands. Once this goes through, then notionally, and it's acceptable obviously, then in every minority language, the EU materials should be made available. I think this is proper, because after all, citizenship in a way is a way of saying, at the European level, you can use your mother tongue in any situation. So actually, I could be speaking Hungarian.
Indeed so. It will be a relief, I should think, for the people of Luxembourg too, whose own language is largely ignored, and they have to speak French or German, of course, officially outside of Luxembourg itself.
Maybe for them it's a secret language and they don't want anybody else to learn it. I don't know.
That may be true. There is this risk that was mentioned in that report that this might be a particular concern to an organisation like Greenpeace, that in America the experience in California has been that big corporate organisations can move the people, can employ lobbyists who actually make it their task solely to do that one job. Big oil has been very, very instrumental in changing the laws and blocking laws in California. Is that a risk in Europe?
It is a risk, of course. I have to be honest and say that big corporations have already a number of different tools that they are currently using to lobby European institutions to intervene into the decision-making process. So we are talking about groups which have also other avenues, and they definitely use them very properly. This might be another tool, it's true. On the other hand, the European Citizens' Right of Initiative does not force the European Commission to take a legislative proposal, but puts an issue on the agenda. And usually the issues which are not on the agenda of EU institutions are issues that citizens would like to raise. So I think there might be a slightly different position within the European Union, and I see this tool more useful for citizens that are not heard, rather than for big corporations, which are definitely quite well heard, especially in Brussels.
If I could add something to this, in a way, it's partly our task in Parliament to scrutinise the legislation. And indeed, to some extent, the media, and say, OK, don't take this citizens' initiative too seriously, it comes from corporation such and such, parliamentarians will look at it, and so on and so forth. So it's not a California situation. I think there are some differences which are actually qualitative.
But we do already have citizens' right to petition the Parliament.
Yes,
the Petitions Committee is very active. It has brought about changes in law in the past. Does this really differ from that in a very big way?
Well, it does, because I think it puts the initiative in the hands of the citizens, and in a way it almost forces the Commission to pay attention to this. With the Petitions Committee, that's a different thing. The fact is that for the first time in the history of the European Union, the citizens have been given the right to initiate legislation, which has hitherto only been the sole prerogative of the Commission. So actually there is a difference. And, well, yes, of course there are dangers. I mean, I accept. When we discussed this in the committee, the Constitution Committee, it certainly came up. What happens with frivolous, the mad, the halt, the lame, the people you were quoting? Yes, I think one has to have filters, and to some extent the complexity which we've been talking about is in a way a filter to prevent the really crazy things. And don't forget, some things are obviously outside the Commission's remit. I mean, we did discuss, for example, what if somebody got together and got 1 million signatures for the reinstatement of the death penalty? The Commission would say this is not receivable. There are areas which are simply not receivable.
Marco Contiero, the fact is, though, that the Commission doesn't have to listen to this. I mean, even if ECI is successful and the campaigners get their meeting in the Commission, perhaps even with a commissioner, it becomes the subject of a public hearing, it still doesn't actually mean there's guaranteed to be a result.
Definitely. This is, of course, one of the drawbacks, let's say, of the Citizens' Right of Initiative. I want to be positive, though, because I think it's, as a tool, it goes in the right way to provide citizens with an instrument to directly address, and it's exactly the difference between the Petition Committee and its role, through the Parliament, which is the only democratically elected institution. Citizens still have, apart from electing their MEPs, another chance to bring on the table, to put on the table of the European debate one specific issue. And this tool can be useful for that, does oblige the European Commission to acknowledge, to organize a public hearing, to debate this issue. So even if it doesn't go as far as imposing a legislative proposal, for example, it is enough to provide citizens with a first very direct democratic tool. And I think I'm very curious to see how will be in the next few years the participation of European citizens to that.
Given the number of lobby companies that are active in Brussels, though, is there a fear that this is going to give them another opportunity for influence peddling, if you like? George Joplin, just briefly, because we're getting near the end.
I think that danger is certainly there. I mean, one can argue about the positive, negative sides of lobbying anyway. I think, at least I'm certainly hopeful, that there are enough safeguards to prevent this system, this instrument from being taken over by big business. And I think the fact that NGOs are becoming involved is good from this particular perspective. But above all, what I really hope to see is that people will actually begin to see themselves as citizens at the European level, which is very weak at this particular time.
You agree with that, Marco?
I do agree, and as I said before, if you select an issue which is very close to the heart of citizens, like GM food and GM crops, we've seen that with our petition, the reaction, the response of people was massive. In just 6 months, we gathered over 1 million signatures because the issue is there, because citizens did feel that the European Commission in that case was not acting responsibly and with precaution on the GM issue. We're very happy that people actually showed it to them.
We've got to leave it there, I'm afraid. Marco Contiero and George Schopflin, thanks very much indeed. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.